So welcome to another chainsaw video. This is the professional 62cc Timberpro chainsaw that I'm using here. And the power company has been doing a lot of tree trimming and tree cutting down on the property here. And a lot of this stuff is what they've cut down. They're pushing back the trees from the power lines. The trees always grow up in between them and they get real close to the power lines, and they don't really want a disruption of service so that the customers don't go without power for long periods of time. But what I'm doing here is just kind of cutting these logs to length. This tree actually fell on its own, I think because they trimmed back a lot of these trees and they opened up an area probably 20 feet wide, I swear. I notice a lot of the trees that they cut down, if they see any ash tree that's pretty close to the wires, they'll just either top it or cut the whole thing down. This tree here is, of course, another ash tree, and it's probably, I think I measured it, it was 20 inches at the base or like 18 at the base, so it's a decent sized tree, and I don't think our tractors have enough of traction and power to pull this whole tree out of there. Well, the backhoe and the Alice might, but we were using the 8N. So I don't think the 8N will have enough traction to pull this whole tree out, so we decided to cut it in about 8-foot lengths. Of course, we've been having a lot of rain here lately, and you just can't really get in there to really do much. The tractor ruts things up as it is, and you get a bunch of moisture and rain and stuff on top of it that it just ruts things up even more. And I figured we would at least just cut these things to length so I know that we can get them out relatively easily. And this is the butt log, which is the biggest log obviously out of all of them, and it's it's got a little bow in it now that I'm looking on this video. Really not much of one, but you can see this whole area that's from where the trees start on the left the whole way to up to the road. This is the whole area that they've cleared under the power lines. And this is another big oak tree that they took down too. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of metal. See all the bluing? Yeah. And then there's this right here. That's metal in there. Ooh, look at that. Oh, come around and pan over that. This here, too. Yeah, that's all metal.
I counted 162 rings.
These logs here, do you want me to try getting them out with the winch?
Nah, maybe.
Whoa, baby. The tree that I'm cutting down here was yet another ash tree, and all they did was they just topped this tree, and I decided to take the rest of it down. So that was the forward clip, and then I reversed it, and now this clip here is slow motion, and I think it's really neat to do this on whenever I cut down a tree, seeing it fall down normal speed, then come back up normal speed, and then fall slow motion. I think it's neat. I've got to say, I really enjoy running this saw. It's nice having a saw that really has a lot of power to it, and it really flies through this wood. It has no problems cutting this ash. Of course, I do have a nice sharp chisel chain on it. I think that's what it is, yeah. It's a chisel chain, and I have it properly filed and the rakers filed down. Generally, whenever I file a chain, anytime I file a chain, I will file down the rakers also. So I wanted to mention here, there is a kickback that happens here. It about knocks me over. It's either this cut or the next one. the saw binds, and I of course wasn't expecting it. I think, I don't know, is it this one? No, it must be the next cut then. Yeah, this one here. So the top of the log was under compression and the bottom was under tension, and it caused the saw to kind of push back on me a little bit, and it actually kind of knocked me over. Like I said, I was not expecting it. There it is. And there it is again. So, you know, I guess you always kind of have to be prepared for stuff like that happening.
Hey, that's a nice log.
That kickback was not super severe, but, you know, it kind of got me by surprise, and the footing was also not that great where I was standing. So this was another tree I actually cut down. I'm standing on a dock right now, and this tree was blocking the view upstream, and I figured, let's get rid of this thing. So we're just using the 8N with a couple chains and the log tongs hooked up to it, and it seems to it pulls this tree right out of there without any problems whatsoever. And it's really nice having some equipment, I've got to say. Here I'm just pulling off these log tongs, and you can see how much they dug in. And here's the bucket on the 8N. That is actually a manure bucket, in case anyone doesn't know, with the big old teeth on it. I know it kind of looks mean, but you can also use it as forks and as a bucket at the same time. So now I'm just limbing this maple tree, just kind of cutting off all the branches, and I'll tell you, you would not believe how heavy this little tree is. I cut this thing down into the creek, and I tried to get as many branches cut off of it as I could before I dropped it into the creek. And what I obviously cut them off before I fell out, so then those ones were still on land, and I reached over on the deck, or it's not a dock, sorry, it's a deck that's on the side of the bank there, and it overlooks the creek. So I leaned over the side of that and pulled up some of those branches, and man, it was like everything I could do to pull up some of these branches. Of course they were wet. Some of them were wet from the creek, but I could not believe how heavy they were. It was almost everything I could do to pick up some of them up out of the water, and it's just amazing how heavy some of these branches and stuff are, with all the leaves and with them being soaking wet. It was I was really surprised how heavy they were, but we're just cutting this thing up, and these logs here, of course, are firewood. There's really nothing, they're not worth milling or doing anything with, but I'm just limbing them and making a mess in the yard in the process. But the next tree is a big monster ash tree. This part of it had fallen when I did the video on the cold start of 6 chainsaws. I had mentioned in that video that we had lost half of that tree, and recently the other half of it fell over into the creek, so we kind of had to fish that out. But you know, it amazes me, there's always stuff to do around here, and if you're not doing something, you should be doing something at least. So this was that tree. There's mushrooms and stuff growing on it, and this is the big gnarly section that is still up in the air, and this is the other half that has fallen. into the, partially into the creek. I have my boat launch right here, and it's, the majority of it fell on the boat launch, which was kind of nice. Not a lot of it fell into the creek, but the one log that was in the creek, it was stuck into the bank about 4 feet deep into the mud.
I think you better cut it there.
Holy cow, this is a big thing.
Yeah.
I figured I would leave this clip in real time, and you can watch the Timberpro cut through a log. Now granted, so this log is kind of rotten, a part of it is, but the wood that is still here is still pretty good and still pretty solid.
That's looking pretty rotten.
Yeah.
So we're just cutting off the end here. It had a couple feet rotten up into the trunk, and as much as I would like to save these logs for lumber, if we could, the problem is one end is pretty rotten on it, and you get boards that are, you know, the outside 3 or 4 or 5 inches is good, but the whole inside is rotten, and then on the other end, it's rotten very, very little bit on the inside, and then you have a couple good feet of good wood left. So I don't really think this tree is destined to be firewood or destined to be lumber. I think it's meant for, it's better suited for firewood. Now I have a 20-inch bar and chain on this saw, and of course I have to cut this thing from both sides. So, you know, it's just one of those things where you just kind of have to just deal with cutting from both sides. It'd be nice to have a saw that'll reach the whole way through, but that also adds more weight that you have to carry around all the time. And I see a lot of guys, what they'll do is they just use a 20 or 22 or 24 inch bar in their saw, and they cut down big monster 4-foot trees and 3-foot trees. So, you know, it's just kind of, you know, 6 of this and half a dozen of that. But I'll tell you, this saw, it really cuts pretty good. Now I know people are going to say that this is a rotten tree, but it's not very rotten right in this cut. Both the top and the bottom of this tree, the base of it, were pretty rotten, but the middle, where I'm cutting right now, seems to be pretty good. So now the water, we are literally right on the edge of the creek. I'm standing partially on my boat launch. I remember whenever I would use this boat launch many years ago, that I would always be real nervous when I had to park something underneath this tree, because I was always worried about this tree falling over and, you know, falling on me or the boat or whatever I was pulling the trailer with. So I'm just making this cut, and I'm trying my hardest not to hit the dirt. And there's also steel on this boat launch, because I put logs down and then rocks to hold the logs down, and then I put boards over top, and there's I use some hefty screws to screw it all down. So now we're just kind of flying through this middle section here, because, you know, I cut 20 inches on the one side, and then I just have to finish the cut on this side. So, and if you notice, I try to stay away from potentially where these logs could roll, if possible. And now we get to, we're going to cut this one limb off. I've often wondered if there's steel right in this section of the tree. I remember on another oak tree that was on the other side of this of the deck. This one is on the left side of the deck, and the oak tree was on the other. That one had steel cables in it, and it kind of looked all gnarled up like this one does. So the reason the oak tree had cables in it is there used to be a zip line that went across the creek here, and it went to another big tree across the creek, and you could go out on a zip line across the creek here and jump in the water. Once you get past the lily pads, the water, it drops off there pretty deep. You'll be 6, 8, 10 feet deep right out there. So, but now we're just making another cut on this tree, and I don't really like where I'm standing. I don't think this thing would have rolled, but you know, you never really entirely know exactly what's going to happen when you cut into something like this. There's a lot of factors at play. You know, if you're on a hill and you cut one log off, it could roll and stuff could twist and bind, and you know, I could get a kickback or something here. So you just kind of have to be careful and really kind of take your time when you're cutting these logs, especially these big ones, and the little ones too, but mainly for these big ones, because you know, if this thing were to roll on you, it's kind of, it would probably be game over for you. So I was fortunate enough cutting through this entire tree. I did not hit any steel, which made me quite happy, because when you hit steel with a chainsaw, they don't really mix, and you pretty much, I wouldn't say you ruin a chain, you just have to do a lot of filing to get the edge back on the saw, on that chain specifically. So I'm glad nothing happened to me while I was cutting this, and you can see this tree even has a big split in it. So I mean, down at this end, like I said, there's still some good wood left, but it has this big split in it. So I don't know. I think this one log here would be good for a sawmill or something. So now we're going to be making, I think this is one of the last cuts I made on this tree. Of course, this was in real time, at least these cuts here. And this Timberpro is, of course, still cutting pretty good. It really helps to not hit the dirt if you can, and I really don't like cutting up logs that have been dragged through the dirt and ones that have been underwater, because they're all covered in mud and dirt and stuff, and you make a couple cuts and you have to sharpen the saw. But this piece here to my left, this is the log I was talking about earlier that was stuck about 4 feet into the ground. When we had pulled it out with the 8N, I did not get it on camera. My camera app on my cell phone here was glitching really bad, so I did not get it on film, but I might take some pictures of it, it's either in this video or in the next one, of that log, and you can see literally it was stuck probably about 4 feet into the mud. And the old 8N pulled that thing out, which was really amazing to me. Seeing a tractor that was 70 years old, either this year or next year, and still using it like we are and doing the things that we are doing with it is kind of a testament to how well it was made. Now, when you start seeing bubbles, look at this. See the bubbles there? That's when you know stuff is shifting and stuff is moving. Just by me making that cut, and probably the cut before it, is what has caused those bubbles to move. Stuff is settling. And here I'm having to be kind of careful. I should have done this cut first. I should not have made the one on this side first. I should have done the far one first. Because if something were to roll or something, I don't really have anywhere to go, and any place that I would go is wet, and of course the ground around here in some of these areas on the creek banks is just like quicksand, and I am not kidding. You'll sink up to your knees before you know it, and then by the time you try to get out, you'll be up into your hips, and then you're really stuck, and then hopefully this log didn't roll on you. So I should have done this cut here last, or first, and then do the one on the boat launch last. So there was a couple branches, I think, that came out here, and one of them had fallen off years ago, and that previous one where I'm cutting, I cut off earlier in the video, but I think I cut as much as I wanted to here. I wanted it to be loose enough that it would break off, you know, when we hooked the chain around it to pull it with the tractor, but I didn't want it to fall and settle, because who knows how much this would have settled and what would have fallen and rolled, and there's just really no room for me. And at the end of this boat launch here, it drops off about 2 feet, and then it's all downhill from there pretty much. So those of you that have made it this far in the video, I figured I would save the best for last. So this is of course, another ash tree. As far as I know, this tree has some really weird looking bark on it, like it's really an old growth ash tree. But what I'm doing here is just cutting down the remaining section of it. I could wiggle this whole tree just by me pushing on it. Up at the top, it would move probably 4, 5, 6 inches, and I really wanted to just get this thing down so we don't have to worry about it falling on one of us or letting loose. I don't think it would, because there's not really any weight against it. I mean, it is leaning somewhat, but I just wanted to cut this thing down and had to use a bunch of wedges and stuff. I didn't want to cut a notch in it because it was so unstable. And like I said, just me pushing on it makes it move.
I got it sort of up on land. Majority of it, at least. I'm glad this thing's down.
Yeah.
Do you see me pushing on it and wiggling it?
Oh yeah, you were wiggling it like a foot.
Wow. See, I didn't want... I know I'm going to get a lot of people saying, oh, you should have cut a notch in it. This tree was so unstable. I could see this whole piece was wiggling.
Oh,
this
really?
whole thing. On all the way down to here. And I didn't want to be underneath this thing because it was so unstable. I didn't want to be here cutting up underneath this with this thing leaning out this way. I am glad this thing is down.
And to training again.
Yep, one of them days. Yeah, I don't think this one's, I don't think this is going to be any good wood. This is fine wood. At least this piece is. Well, there you go. That's us, at least day one of hauling out these logs and cutting stuff. So, look, there's a bug. See that? This thing has worms in it. See the red bug? Look at that. That's probably what is helping to kill this tree. Unless that's emerald ash borer larva.
Could be.
I don't think they're a caterpillar though, but whatever.
That.
Yeah, I didn't want to.
What's that?
Those are mushrooms?
Mushrooms.
I did not want to be under this thing while I was cutting it. I didn't even want to be right here because this thing was looking like it was wanting to go this way.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad this tree's down, and it was making me nervous being underneath this thing, cleaning up these logs and cutting this stuff. We probably should have gotten rid of this first, but oh well. So that's how things work.